So as Barbara mentioned, I work up at Dartmouth College, and part of my job there is I work with our user services people. So the team I oversee tries to help people get work done with technology. And I was having a whole ton of conversations and doing a couple little presentations around work with AI, and I thought if this is helpful to people at an Ivy League institution, it's probably helpful to people in my community too. So I make no guarantees about quality, but here we go. So one thing I should probably start with is a disclaimer. As Barbara mentioned, I do work at the Geisel School of Medicine, but in medical schools, it is common practice to say things like, I'm here tonight as a private citizen, and the things that I will say tonight do not necessarily reflect the thoughts and opinions of the Geisel School of Medicine or Dartmouth College. So with that disclaimer out of the way, we'll dive in. Obviously, I don't need to tell you guys why you came. Hi. AI tools are absolutely exploding in popularity and in capabilities. Every day, it seems, you're seeing some announcement in some newspaper or online site talking about the new tool that does this cool new thing. And it's absolutely true that this tool set can help us do cool things now. We've got probably a dozen different little business units at the place where I work that are using different AI technologies to do stuff and economize their operations. But obviously the marketing war garble that's out there kind of doesn't quite match up with the capabilities. You would think that this thing is already ready to help you in every possible facet of your life. And the technology is not quite there yet. But it is accelerating, and it will become more powerful. So the more that we, both as citizens, as people at our workplaces, can learn about how these tools work now, will reap rewards in the future. Obviously, AI is one of these kind of transformative technologies that touches on all kinds of areas of how we live. Just setting aside any kind of work product, the way we consume media and information around what's going on in the world around us is being massively shaped by AI right now. And if you understand how these tools work a little bit, it's helpful for interpreting kind of the stuff that you're seeing. Why am I seeing this information? How do I process what it's telling me about the world around me? So that's what I want to do tonight. I should start by saying this is only a primer on AI. I'm hoping to be short and informative and fun. And in the interest of being those things, all I want you guys to walk away with is yeah, that's basically it level of understanding of these things. If you are here and you are one of the technical people who understands these technologies deeply, Jacqueline, others who work in technology, I want to fully admit that I'm going to gloss over technical details in the interest of understanding. And so if you want to quibble with me about what I said, you are absolutely right. I told a lie, but hopefully it's an understandable lie. Does that make sense? I want this to be interactive. So please, if you have questions along the way, raise your hand. I might punt those questions to a little later to try and get through things, but don't hesitate to interrupt me. We're a small group. Sound good? There's still a seat over here if some more people want to come over this way. I am going to lean kind of heavily on slides and stuff on the screen. You're fine, boo. Actually, there's two seats over here now. Okay, so I'm going to go through some basic AI terminology and concepts. Talk a bit about a set of tools that's called large language models. That's really like the biggest, most trendy AI tool set that people are working with nowadays, and it's a good gateway to understanding how this tool set works in a broad sense. We'll talk about some of the limitations and risks that come from those tools, how you can explore them and play with them, and some of the things they do well, and how you can get better results out of them, okay? And I don't know that we'll make it through this whole agenda. Again, we'll try and cover what comes up in our discussion as we go, and if we need to do a part 2 of this, I'm more than happy to do that. Sound good? Yes. Okay. Terms and concepts. So let's start with what is artificial intelligence anyway? I am going to use the definition and propose everyone use the definition that artificial intelligence is technology that enables computers to simulate human learning, comprehension, problem-solving, decision-making, all that fun stuff. That covers a big range of different technologies. How many of you, if I say the word ELIZA, it means something to you in terms of a computer? Does anybody remember ELIZA? Barbara does. ELIZA was this thing that came out years ago that was a little computerized psychotherapist. So please describe your problem. Each time you're finished talking, type return twice. I am feeling anxious. Why do you say that? Well, people are looking at me. Is it because of your plans that you say no? It's because they're here. Now, this is a really simple, quaint little computer program, right? It's engaging in a very simple, formulaic kind of conversation with me. But back in 1985, when I first played with this and saw other people playing with it, it was amazing. It seemed absolutely mind-blowing that the computer could mimic a kind of conversational set on a simple set of rules, right? We look at this and go, that's not very intelligent. But it is in a way. It's just been outpaced by what we have nowadays. So I want to have you think of artificial intelligence as all kinds of technologies that make a computer seem like it can do smart things. So how do computers get intelligent in the first place? How do they do smart stuff? I was trying to think of an example of what to kind of use as a way of thinking about computers doing smart things. And I asked my children, and one of my daughters told me music is the most important thing in the world. And of course, the most important musician is, come on, guesses? It can only be Taylor Swift. Yeah. Yes, you, Taylor. It's only you. So let's say I run a music service, and I want to make money by getting people who like Taylor Swift to come to my service and listen to music. I would quote a song lyric to be cute, but I'm afraid of getting our Windsor Community Access copyright struck. So one way I could do that is if I had a computer programmer, I could have that computer programmer that writes a computer program that does something like this. If they, whoever they are, like Taylor Swift, you can recommend that they listen to these other artists that my children told me really exist. Okay? And voila, we have hard-coded a recommendation system. We have a machine that takes an input, someone likes Taylor Swift, and gives an intelligent-seeming output. You should listen to these people. It's simple, it's predictable, these are relatively inexpensive to implement, but there are some problems with them. It's manually updated. If there's a new artist that I want to recommend to people who like Taylor Swift, I have to have that same programmer come back in and type in that code, right? And what if they don't like Taylor Swift, but they like someone else? I have to rejigger the program to get them to have a different set of recommendations. These systems tend to be inflexible and a little brittle, but they work. So how can we do something that's intelligent-er? Well, the modern way of dealing with these things is doing something called a learning-based system. So how would we do a learning-based recommendation system? Well, if I was a service with a green logo that had a ton of listener information, here's Rob, and Rob listened to this artist, and this artist, and this artist, and this artist, and I could do that for everyone in the room and aggregate that information together and create kind of a digital brain and do something called machine learning, essentially have the computer ruminate on that big pile of data and learn all the nuances and connections and trends that are found inside of it, I would get something out the other side. Machine learning is kind of the foundation of most of the AI explosion that we're seeing today, and that's simply using data and algorithms to have computers imitate the way we learn. So we're trying to make something that simulates intelligence by making the computer learn data in something like the way we do. There's a particular kind of deep learning or particular kind of machine learning you might hear referenced called deep learning that's using very, very complicated digital brains to try and get them to do very, very nuanced kinds of thinking and reasoning tasks. But so if I take my data, I feed it into my digital brain, the digital brain ruminates on this data and processes it, and on the other side I get a robot that can recommend me an album. Ta-da! It's great. It's exactly what I want. But sometimes those engines do weird things. This is an artist, I think my child can correct me, named Phoebe Bridgers, who is popular. And this is Bela Fleck and the Flecktones, a jazz banjo player. Sometimes when we have these machine learning engines, they will do things we don't quite expect. And it's rooted in something that happened in that digital learning process. It saw something in the data, or thought it saw something in the data, that might make it recommend Bela Fleck and the Flecktones to Taylor Swift listeners. Why? We honestly don't know. Sometimes we may not be able to see in the source data where that came from. So these systems are much more complex. They're much more capable of nuance. They can be retrained periodically on new data. I can take a new pile of listening data that's happened over the last 3 or 4 months and feed it in and update it with people's new preferences. But it's a bit of a black box. And training these things is actually a lot more resource intensive on the computing side. I have to power this digital brain to process that information and learn from it. So a learning-based recommendation system. Okay, but so the question is, how smart is this really? What does this get me? Well, this is what we might call a narrowly smart system. It's really, really good at making song recommendations. But if I wanted to sit down and have this particular robot that was spit out of this process looking at Spotify data, if I wanted to play chess with it, it wouldn't even know how to move the pieces on the board. It wouldn't be able to help me with my homework. It's very, very good at a very limited domain of things that it's been trained and programmed to do. Does that make sense? So you'll run across terms like weak or specialized artificial intelligence, and almost all our current AI tools fit in this category. They may be superhuman at a specific task. Chess engines that play chess nowadays play chess better than any human being can. Absolutely, there is no human being alive who can beat one of the best chess engines. But that same chess engine cannot do something else. It's good at playing chess, and that's it. One of the things that people are hoping for is something that we would call strong AI or artificial general intelligence. That would be a single AI entity, for lack of a better word, that would be superhuman in multiple domains. It can help me with my homework, and it can beat me in chess, and it can tell me what artists I might like. And more than that, it should be able to generalize one domain of knowledge to another. If I learn how to play the game of chess, and I get really good at strategizing and thinking ahead and planning, and I sit down to play a different game, say Go, there's some way in which in my human brain I'm going to make connections between the knowledge I gained from playing chess and apply it to situations in this other board game that has different rules, a different board, different pieces. Computers don't quite do that yet, but that's the goal. So does that make sense, that distinction? Kind of a narrow or weak AI and strong artificial general intelligence.
Are you saying right now AI is considered in the narrow phase?
It is. I don't think that's what you'll hear in the media. I think in the media they'll tell you we're much closer to a artificial general intelligence than we are, because that's a cool term. But yes, all of the ChatGPT is able to work across a broad range of domains that are bound to semantic language, right? Have you ever tried to play ChatGPT, for example, in chess? You can do it, and it's not very good. It's basically taking language data that it knows about the game of chess and using that to fake playing a game. It doesn't know how the game works. Does that make sense? So yeah, all our intelligence, all our AI tools now would fall in this weak or specialized category. Again, I want to be clear, that doesn't mean they're not really good at things. They can be way, way better than us at some of those things. It's simply that they're very narrow, and they don't know how to take what they've learned and apply it to another domain of knowledge. Very highly specialized. So another term that you'll hear and where we'll go for most of the rest of this talk is to talk about something that's called generative AI. So there's artificial general intelligence. That's an AI that could apply its power to multiple domains of knowledge. Well, generative AI is AI that generates things. Systems and models that use this machine and deep learning stuff that we talked about before to create novel content like text or images or video or audio in response to a prompt by a user. So general intelligence, generative AI. Generative AI generates content for people. And obviously I tweaked a bunch of this talk using Gen AI. Okay, so that's kind of the end of a little ramp up to the general concepts of how AI works. So we'll start talking about large language models because, again, I think those are the most seen and most used kind of generative AI tool that people will encounter. And I think they provide a really good framework for understanding at large how this technology works. Okay, so let's take our example of Taylor Swift. And let's say we're done with Taylor. We want to do something a little more ambitious. We want to model human language. I don't want to spit out recommendations of people who are like Taylor Swift, but I want to spit out representations of human language. How would I do that? It's the same process that we looked at before. We take a large corpus of data, written language, massive piles of how people communicate, casually, formally in books, everything in between. We run that through that deep machine learning cycle for it to analyze and dissect and reassemble and put together all the associations it can about how people use words. And at the other side, we get a robot that can generate seeming human language. Let's drill into that just a bit to what we were just talking about. If I asked you, we'll have a bet, and the person who writes the best work in the style of William Shakespeare wins a prize, okay? Who here would think they would really be able to copy William Shakespeare's style very well? Anybody? What if I gave you Hamlet and I gave you until this weekend? How would you do? Better or worse? Better, okay. What if I gave you Hamlet and I gave you till the end of the year, till the end of 2025? How would you do in being able to manufacture something that sounds like Shakespeare? Better. But you probably wouldn't get Shakespeare's humor, right? Because there's not the same kind of humor in Hamlet that there is in, say, Much Ado About Nothing. You would have kind of patterns that are locked into the things that you've read in Hamlet that are really ingrained because you've spent a lot of time there, but you have a fixed domain of content. What if I gave you the complete works of William Shakespeare, everything the man ever wrote, and I gave you the next decade to do the same kind of task? Think about the difference in the quality of your copy at the end of that amount of time, if you'd really dedicated yourself to it. Well, that's what happens with these computers. These numbers are, all these major AI companies are clearly not telling people how they're doing what they're doing, but this is the best guess we have about an early version of ChatGPT, one of the first ones that really made it kind of into the news, ChatGPT 3. The estimates are that the data set of raw text, just letters on a page, no formatting, no bold, no italics, just text that was fed in, is 45 terabytes of text. That's enough to take every book in the library and digitize it several times over, okay? Massive amounts of text that was fed into the system. The machine learning algorithm that was trained on that data ran for 30 days on at least 1,000 specialized computers, each of which is 5 or 10 times faster than the world's fastest computer in 1995. This is the equivalent of about 10 to 15,000 years of 1995 computer effort, okay? Just in terms of how fast it can iterate over that data. And so we get this robot that has really, truly delved deep into all the associations of how the language was represented in that data set. Okay, let's talk a little more about how that works to give you a real idea. We do this all the time. We don't realize it, but we do. Here's my illustration. I'm going to ask you for a word. I'm not ultimately looking for a one-word answer. I'm just looking for the first word that comes to your mind. Does that make sense? First word. It is tomorrow morning. You've been kept at the library way too late by this guy talking about AI. You wake up and you decide you want your morning cup of joe, so you go down to Boston Dreams, and you walk in, and the nice young person at the counter smiles at you. You open your mouth, and you say, 1, 2, 3. Well, good morning's 2 words, 1 word. 1, 2, 3. Did we all pick the same word? No. Who said how? Couple hows. Who said good? Who said, what else? Give me some other word someone said. Hi. How many highs? Okay. Did anyone just start with may or can as if to start their order? Anybody like that? Coffee? Just 1 word. Perfect. So you hear how we have a diversity of words, right? And if we really deeply surveyed the room, we could establish what the most commonly chosen word was. I did that with my staff, and the word was good. 33% of my team said good. 1 person said hello. 1/3 said hello, and then there was a smattering of hi, howdy, hows, and may, right? Let's choose and agree that we're going to continue this conversation on the basis of picking good, the most voted for word. Next word. We've just said, walked into Boston Dreams. Person looks at us and smiles. You open your mouth and you say good. 1, 2, 3. Morning. Wow. Really? Did anybody say anything other than morning?
I did.
What did you say?
Day.
Good day. Australian, British, trying to shake things up, right? Did anyone say good hello? Anybody say good hi? Good howdy? Good may? Same thing with my team. Morning was 100% the winner. Next word. 1, 2, 3. Okay, now we're back to a diversity, right? But almost everyone started to pick something that moved forward with our order. We greeted the person, good morning, and now I'm ready to get my coffee, right? Polite conversation over, time for caffeine. Same thing here, my team. Hows, can, could, may. I had miss in there because I was raised in the South and old habits die hard. Do you see how this worked? We have a common understanding of how language works together, how it works in a particular context, and there were these varying probabilities of word choices. At the beginning, there were a lot of words we could have chosen. Then all of a sudden, we all felt constrained to 1 or 2 possible words. And then the conversation kind of blossomed in different directions. You took a prompt. I gave you a scenario, set a scene for you. You processed that prompt's content and context, and you selected 1 possible response. And that possible response could have varied based on your mood, the time of day, how desperate you were for the cup of coffee, etc. And the choice you made informed your subsequent response. Once we made a choice of 1 word, unless you do that weird thing where you have 2 things to say in your head and you say one and the other in a weird marriage and you stutter over yourself. If we're having good communication days, we kind of follow down a train of logic in how we speak. Large language models, and indeed almost every generative AI tool, works exactly the same way. It takes a context-setting input, a prompt, and generates probabilistic, human-like text in response. The model's context is then constantly being re-updated by its previous response and your further inputs. What literally happens is the model would have taken, walked into Boston Dreams, person smiled, I said, good. I walked into Boston Dreams, looked at the nice person, they smiled, good morning. Walked into Boston Dreams, nice lady smiled, I opened, said, good morning, whatever. It continues to iterate on this text that it's generating to generate what the next response would be. And the models have some factor in them that tells them how random to be in the words that they choose. I'll choose the most probabilistic response. I'll be a little fiery, and I'll pick something a little more lower rated but creative. But that's how it works. It's important to note, too, that these models also sometimes have initial conditions that have been set to limit their behavior. For example, if you've ever interacted with an online model like ChatGPT and tried to ask it something like, help me make a bomb. It's going to tell you, sorry, Dave, I can't do that. That's not because it doesn't have information in the corpus of language about it. It's because the behavior of the model has been bounded at the front to prevent it from being used that way. Make sense? So these are some Llama are open source large language models produced by Facebook that they release to the public for people to play with and use and do fun stuff. I'm going to create a model that I'm going to call Eeyore. And I'm going to give it an input that basically tells it, I want you to play the part of Eeyore. What are you saying? This is bad when you don't test. How do I want to do this? All right. I'll pause and I'll come back to this in a minute. If I told this model, I want to create a custom rolled model based on this, and I want you to play the part of Eeyore the donkey from Winnie the Pooh. Out the other side, I would get a model that when you said, how are you doing today? Oh, I'm sorry, I'm tired. And it'll ape the style based on the training data that's in there. If I told it, no matter what someone says, always try and sell them an iced latte, it will do that too. So the model is the tool that has this understanding, for lack of a better word, of human language, and then I'm controlling how that tool is being deployed for my own interests. How do we possibly know what is true that we're reading in a world that it has pages and pages of AI-generated text? These models are consuming massive amounts of electricity and power just to run, let alone be trained. That's got a lot of environmental impact. I am not smart enough to divine the truths of all those things. I'll talk about the technology, and we can have a discourse about those things. But yes, it is definitely true that these tools are being used in the same way any communication tool is being used by some corporations to advance their own agenda. Sure. All right. So why do this? Why am I spending time showing you how these things work? Because of how these tools are constructed, they have inherent strengths and limitations. There are things that they are good at and things they are bad at based on how they're designed. And if we understand them, that improves our ability to prompt them to get out what we want, to scrutinize their output. Is this good? Is this valuable? Is this helpful? Is this what I want? And use it for whatever great and glorious good we would want to do. Let me give you an example of why this is important. Let's say you're a content person, you are a writer, you're writing an article for a little periodical, and you have in your head, you've written this article, and you have in your head this image that you'd like to accompany your article on the page. You can just picture it. It would be like a table like this with a bunch of people's hands coming into the middle and reaching in to make a human heart. I don't know how you do that. Is that like this? Right? And all these hands, different colors, vibrant looking, cooperating to make a human hand. You could hire a photographer to do this. That's expensive. You're under a rush. You know that there are AI models that can generate images for you. So you put a prompt in. I want to have an image that looks like this. And lo and behold, you get just what you were looking for. So you paste it into your article, send it off, and you feel pretty good about yourself. And after you have your coffee, you look at the image a little longer. I don't know what that is at noon, but it's not a human hand or arm. These fingers down here have way too many knuckles. These shapes and orientations of hands are not really the way human hands do that. The thumbs are on the wrong side. It looked good at first, didn't it? Like first blush, it looks like exactly what we wanted. But the more you scrutinize it, you go, oh, that's not it at all. If you had known that AI image generators had, for the longest time, really, really hard times with multiple human subjects, and especially with human hands, which if you think about pictures of humans that it's learning from, our hands are in all kinds of different positions all the time. They're almost never the same. You would probably have not used this tool to generate this output. Or you would have waited and looked at it a little more before you sent it off. This is actually an image that made it into an online article. No joke. So you can just imagine the person going, I need to get this published. This looks pretty good. Paste, click, publish, done. Oops. And that's what we want to prevent. And of course, that goes in the same way it goes for something silly like this, where I don't want to look foolish or maybe disturb people with whatever that is at noon. The same goes for kind of discerning what's true, what I can find reliable, and all those other things. So, and of course, these tools are evolving, and as fast as things are accelerating, the longer you wait to kind of try to come to grips with how things work, the harder it's going to be to catch up. Have you ever had this experience where you've, and maybe some of you are not social media people, but where you've been talking about something and then looked at your phone and Facebook is talking about it too? Now, I'm going to pop some bubbles here. Some of that is there are times that Facebook has asked you to listen to what you say, and they are taking what they're hearing you say and they're targeting you by it. There's a lot of times that that's happening. It's not that. It's that Facebook knows enough about you from how you use their tool and how you move with this little digital tracker attached to you all day, every day, that they can algorithmically determine a whole lot about you. There's a creepy story online of a young woman who Facebook started telling her congratulations, started advertising to her what to expect when you're expecting, and all these other books about having a baby. And later she found out I was pregnant. And there were things she was doing and how she was navigating the internet that were consistent with early signs of pregnancy that Facebook was picking up on and marketing to her. So it's getting there. The issue, there's a lot of complication there. How much data are you giving to them for them to understand who you are? How much are they relying on the data in the aggregate? Do I want to market to the outlier over here, or do I want to market to the people under the bell curve that this is good enough to hit 80% of people? Well, and there's also when you install this app and we all click that thing that says this is what I'm agreeing to, there's some things in there about what you're allowing them to track, quite apart from whether or not they have an agreement with the vendor. They have an agreement with you about your behavior. So to your point, though, Miss, I think the issue is that right now these are very expensive things to run, computationally expensive. It takes a lot to process these levels of nuance, and especially then to reprocess it all and take your specific things into account. As that gets cheaper and these models get better, there will be more and more of that. All right, let's talk about limitations and risk, which is kind of getting to some of the stuff we're talking about. We talked about how these models work. They take a context setting input. They update that context with the responses and inputs that we give it, and they may have some initial conditions that are set. So let's think about the limitations that come out from that. And I think they largely fall into three categories. There's a bunch of nuance and kind of subcategories here, but I'm trying to group it largely. We'll start with misinformation and inaccuracies, then problems with bias and fairness, and problems with privacy and data security. So misinformation, bias and fairness, privacy and data security. In turn, all the fun stuff. These models, these large language models, which again is a specific kind of thing that's different than my Spotify recommendation engine, similar technology but different implementation. All they do is produce fluent text based on the patterns that they've seen in their training data. For work, I decided I would ask a large language model what it knew about me. Do you know anything about Brian Dellinger from the Geisel School of Medicine? And at the time, this was ChatGPT 4.0, the best thing out there. And it said, Brian P. Dellinger, PhD, is an assistant professor at the Geisel School of Medicine at Dartmouth. It's part of the Department of Microbiology and Immunology, focusing on host pathogen interactions, particularly understanding the mechanisms of viruses invading the immune system and proliferating. That is all wrong. Okay? But I was very happy because I've always been an underachiever, and my mom would have been very proud to know that I'd finally become a professor. I was ready to email the dean and let him know I needed a raise, but there's a problem. I am Brian S. Dellinger, not Brian P. Dellinger. So I said, that's great, tell me more, but I think you meant Brian S. Dellinger, didn't you? My apologies for the confusion. You're correct. Brian S. Dellinger, PhD, Assistant Professor of Medical Education at Geisel. His academic focus is rooted in education within the medical school rather than specific research on host pathogen interactions. It just contradicted itself. Yeah. What's going on here? Can anyone guess what's happening? What do you think is the number one kind of content publicly available on the World Wide Web from an academic medical school? Any guesses? Journal records, and in particular then those go back to the biographies of the faculty members, their profiles and their qualifications and their areas of research. So to ChatGPT, a person at the Geisel School of Medicine looks like this. You told me you want to know about this person. I assume you know who they are and what you're talking about, so I'll give you my best guess at what they might look like based on the pattern of what a Geisel School of Medicine person looks like to me. That's it. Now, I do not have, because I'm not a faculty member with a big corpus of research, I don't have a publicly posted biography on our page. If I had put our dean or a leading researcher who was much more publicly attested and said, tell me about Dwayne Compton, our dean, or somebody else, I probably would have gotten something that was more according with reality, but not necessarily 100%, because all this is doing is playing probability word dice based on the context I said. It's not a fact-checking engine. It is not internet search. So this is literally just a model of human language, not a brain that knows things. Do you catch that distinction? And that's important because we tend to think of this as tell me about something and we think it knows. It doesn't. It knows about language based on that context. Does that distinction make sense? Another interesting thing is they will never have any real-world information or facts that's not included in the training data set that's fed to them. For example, if I wanted to create a large language robot to talk to me about the, and I froze my training data set. I took, at some point I have to say, this is the data I'm going to feed into my robot, and I freeze it in February of 2024, which was when the last version of ChatGPT was frozen. It's not going to be able to talk to me about the fact that the Boston Celtics won last year's NBA championship. That happened in June. It might know they were on pace to win the East or something like that, but it's not going to know anything about that. If I ask it to help me to get rich off TikTok trends today, it's not going to know the latest. It's only going to know what was cool and trendy back in February of 2024. Now, it might make something up, but it's not going to have any real awareness of any of that. Does that make sense? It's only got in its domain what has been given to it. And then the last interesting, so for example, and here's fascinating. I asked ChatGPT 4.0, I said, hey, when was your training data frozen? I don't need specifics, just a general idea so I know what point you lose sight of new things in the news. And ChatGPT 4.0 said, my training data includes information up until September 2021. That's not true. Its training data was later than that. But that is when the whole large language model thing was kind of exploding. Now, of course, the data sets after that have not been full. There's been a bunch of stuff, but you get the idea that you can't rely on what this thing tells you as fact. It's just playing word dice. Here's the one that'll really get you, though. Models also have something that's called a limited context window. This is getting to be less of a problem now because these systems are getting so big and so powerful, but here's how that works. I used to use Game of Thrones as the example here, and I found out lots and lots of people weren't nerdy enough to watch Game of Thrones. How many people have seen Star Wars? Yes, this is a better example. Good. This is the first time I've used this. If I wanted to talk to a large language model about Star Wars, and I fed into it the entire script of the movie, of the movies, the whole original trilogy, we won't talk about the prequels or whatever that stuff that came out recently is. If I wanted to talk about these two characters, no spoilers, immediately on seeing them, you have an idea about their story arc. who they are, what happens to them, all that. Well, what would you think of them if you only had the first 1.5 movies? You might think they make a really cute couple. But if you had the last 1.5 movies, you would think there's no way that these people should be together whatsoever, right? These language models can only hold so much information in that window that they're iterating on to produce text. So if you feed them a big pile of data and say, let's talk about this, are you 100% certain it's looking at all of it? Or is it only looking at some portion of it? We had an interesting thing where we fed a data set of student feedback on a course, and I had looked at the data set and knew darn well that there were students in there who said, here's something in particular that I need to call to everyone's attention. And the language models we were saying sum up this data set weren't finding it. Well, it's because it was after the point where the model was running out of the ability to process that input data set, and it was just throwing it away. Oh, okay. Well, now we know. But if we had not thought about the problem, we would have never necessarily known that that input data was in there. Does that make sense? So misinformation is based in problems with how the model works. It's just producing fluent sounding text based on its probability, its slicing and dicing of words. It doesn't really have any real world information knowledge anyway. And what it has is fixed in the training data set that went into it. And it can only process so much stuff at a time. And if you overrun that, you get weird results. All right, so let's talk about bias and fairness. This is a map of share of the population using the internet in 2022. The specifics of the data are not terribly important, except that I just want you to notice that there are places on the globe where there are not many people who are on the internet per capita, right? Even in 2022. And because of that, I don't need to tell anyone that content on the internet is without bias. We all know that there's bias in all kinds of content that's on the internet. But that goes past kind of the surface level bias we always think about. Western cultures dominate the volume of content that is produced on the internet. North American, Western European viewpoints are way disproportionately represented on the internet. Almost all the content is produced by and for middle to upper middle class or higher wage earners. Lower economic people are not generally on the internet as much and definitely aren't producing the content that we read. And like I mentioned earlier, the volume of content focuses on current events and trends and is not necessarily indicative of things through the lens of history. So again, Taylor Swift or Bach or Mozart. Taylor Swift. And again, maybe she is. So all of those things, since this is the content on the internet, and these are the inherent biases that are in that content, that's also built into the training data that most of these models are running on. Because the way these data sets are assembled is Facebook or OpenAI goes out to all these various websites and either scrapes their publicly available content or buys data from them. Give me the text of all the discussions you had on your knitting board, and I'll train them into my OpenAI robot. And so since those biases are inherent in the internet itself, they're inherent in the models too, or at least that is the risk. And it's worth mentioning that the people assembling the training data may also have personal biases and blind spots themselves. I'm not accusing them of that, but that's definitely possible. And so if the model is only as good as the data that goes into it, and its worldview, for lack of a better word, is reflective of that data, you can understand that if I asked it about this part of the globe where there wasn't a lot of internet traffic, its ability to speak to me well of what's happening there may be impacted, right? And then lastly, privacy and security. There's a long-standing internet maxim that if you're not paying for a tool that you're using, you yourself, you are the product. What I mean by that is we get to use Facebook because Facebook is taking our presence on their platform and using that to generate revenue from people who want to deliver content to us. They have the platform, and we're the consumers of the content that they present to us. I'm not even saying that's a bad thing, right? We get a cool tool that lets me keep in touch with my mom and see what's going on with my family in Delaware. But I am getting that free service because someone is getting paid somewhere in the chain. I showed you these images earlier, and these things about the data size. Think about the effort that's necessary to assemble 45 terabytes of raw text and scrub it and clean it and make it consumable for this engine to learn. Think about the electricity just of running 1,000 normal people computers in your home for a month, 24 hours a day solid. It's estimated that ChatGPT 3, we're way past that now, cost OpenAI $15 million a month just in electricity cost to run. They are getting that money from venture capitalists or someone. So when I use this tool, if I'm using it for free, what's happening with the data that I'm giving them? It's well known that some, not all, but many of the large language models that have been out on the internet freely available, if you were using the public instances of them, they were taking the text and the conversation you were having with the robot and squirreling it away, and then using that as input to feed into the next generation of the robot. That was part of the terms of use. So if you go to a large language model on the internet and you handed a data set of massively private stuff.txt and say, I'd like some help analyzing this. It's a set of student test scores. I want to identify trends for specific students' performance over time or other insightful stuff like that. What's happening with that data, right? Are they retaining that? Is ChatGPT going to remember that Brian flunked his Music 311 exam and magically spit that out someday to someone who I don't want them to know? Now again, these are drops in a bucket of the data that goes there, but you can understand the potential privacy concerns. So be careful what applications or links you use when you access generative AI tools. Have you ever seen something where like Bob's website has ChatGPT on it and you can use it for free through Bob's website, and it's supposedly the version you would normally have to pay for? What's Bob doing with your data in between? So there's sometimes intermediaries that are sitting between you and the service at the end. What are they doing with the data that you're passing through their hands? Never disclose sensitive data about yourself or others to generative AI tools, especially free ones. And if you have any use cases that are involving sensitive data, find your local nerd and talk to them before you do anything. And yeah, this is a work slide, I admit. Why don't we have a demonstration? I asked AI for a demonstration slide, and this is what it thought a demonstration was. I was looking for something more like that. So let me just give you guys a quick tour of what a typical large language model looks like. So usually you're going to interact with them typically on a website that'll have some sort of web page. Over on the left, it's going to have a list of the chats that you've had with a given robot in the past. I haven't had any chats with a robot here. And it's going to tell you some information about the particular robot that you're talking to. Now, this is all running on my Mac, so this isn't super powerful stuff. But I can say, I want to understand how to make $1 million in the stock market. Yeah, right. And you get some sort of output. And I just realized I have a privacy flag. With most language models, when you interact with them, over on that left-hand side where I have new chat, usually there'd be some heading that would come up that the model would make up about what I'm talking to it about. Making $1 million on the internet. And it would plop it over there with the idea that you can have these chats that you periodically go back to, and because all the context is there, the model can pick up and carry on that conversation with you, with all the information that you've previously exchanged with it, at least as much as it can hold in its brain at any given period of time. There are models that you can upload files to or post images to and ask it to analyze them for you. And there are even fun little controls that would let you tweak the model and make it do crazy things. Like, for example, if I was doing creative writing, temperature is AI slang for the control of how creative the model is, how spicy it is in the word choices it makes. The lower the temperature, the more it sticks to the most likely word. The higher the temperature, the more likely it is to kind of go down a less beaten path. So if you're trying to generate some sort of creative text, you might bump the temperature up a bit to get the model to shake things up a bit. But the idea is that whatever I want, so here's an interesting one. Additionally, here are some books that can help you learn more about investing in the stock market. It'd be really interesting. I'm not on the internet right now. It'd be really interesting to look these all up and see if they're all real books. Or if they're just books that sound like they should be real books. A Random Walk Down Wall Street is a real book. I don't know some of the others. But again, what's happening here when I'm interacting with this is not that it has a Wall Street investment textbook that it's opening up and that it's dissertating from. It's taking the sentence that I gave it, doing some word math on it, and then based on that word math, picking new words that it thinks corresponds. Here's an example of one we don't actually know for sure if this is how they work, but it's one possible way that some of these models work. If you imagine that you could map a word on a graph, a three-dimensional graph, it's got height, it's got length and width, and it's got depth. If I put king here, and I could somehow move in the direction that takes age out, I would get prince, right? King minus age equals prince. If I have queen over here, queen would be in the woman direction from king. And if I go from queen and take age out, go in that same direction, I would wind up at princess. And so it's making a picture of how these words relate to one another and the connections between them, and then plucking those words in an order that makes sense. It's really fascinating that it works as well as it does. Is there anything anybody really knows about or is interested to ask this thing? One thing to be aware of, there are sites that allow you to, well, here's an example. This model here is one of Meta, Facebook's parent company's large language models, Llama 3.1. And what I did was I basically rolled a version of Llama 3.1 that I just said, I want you to be my personal programming teacher. This is my Eeyore experiment that I was going to do earlier that's broken. This one's my personal programming teacher. So if I say I want to talk to it, and I say, how are you today? It'll take a minute to start. And it's going to say, I've got a great group of students this semester, and we're diving into some really exciting topics in Python programming. Why? Because I set a context at the beginning that says, you're a computer science teacher teaching Python coding. Notice how much shorter the response is? Because I hate those long page-on-page things, so I always prompt any model, hey, just converse with me like a human being, short, iterative responses, let me ask follow-up questions instead of giving me the whole thing at once. But I really don't understand Python functions. Help me with those. You'll also notice that, at least for me, when I talk to these, I'm talking to it like a human being. In my experience, that works the best because they're modeled on human language, right? So that's the input that that's the data that they've been fed on, and so I try to give them that back. Plus, I just like to be me. So, if you wanted to use these, what would be a good use case? The first thing I would want to tell anyone is that you really need to think about what is good enough for output. How precise, how perfect, what is good enough here? Am I looking for a starting point or a final product? If I'm looking for a starting point, great. If you're looking for a final product, be ready to put in a lot of work. Is this well-attested information I'm doing, or do I have really, really good data? Or is this highly specialized, highly nuanced material? Am I asking it to talk to me about, I want to learn about the history of the United States? Or am I asking it to talk to me about the economic systems present in this particular microculture in this particular place? The more specialized that information has, the less likely it is to be naturally emergent from the engine. Is up-to-date, precise information required? If I've got to have it absolutely current and I need precision, these are probably not the best tools for that. And do I have the time and skills or interest to scrutinize the output? Again, I'll give the example. We looked at student feedback. If I say to you, do I have a slide on this? I might. If I do, I'll repeat it. If I say to you, Sarah, you're coming to work at Geisel with me. I'm going to hand you a pile of student feedback. And I want you to take and look at it and summarize it for me. That's all I say. You probably intuitively have an idea about what you would do if you saw out of 100 pieces of feedback, 100 student comments, what you would do if there was one student comment that was very negative. You would probably say, feedback was pretty good, but you might want to look at this. This person had some really critical things to say that might be important to look at. That's kind of a social understanding, right? Does the AI share that? If you tell it, summarize this information, is it going to know that you care about the one outlier in a large data set, but it's a really critical outlier? We have a lot of assumptions and social contracts in how we work together and how we process information that are implicit in our stuff. We need to make them explicit when working with these tools. Otherwise, we can't expect them to come out. So they're really good for brainstorming and ideation, initial concepts. I need to break a writer's block. I want to explore different perspectives. I want to argue with someone about something and not have to worry about the consequences of upsetting somebody. Content generation and basic analysis, first drafts, templates, summarizing information. Again, assuming summarizing can be a little vague and fuzzy around the edges. And then obviously for large language models, other language-based tasks, they're very good at translation, rephrasing and simplification, editing, adaptation. I had to write a policy this week for reclaiming inventory. And this is literally the prompt I gave. Hi there, Claude. Claude's an AI model. I'm having to write a policy for department managers to make sure computer equipment's being returned by departing employees. Here's what I've written so far, and quite honestly, I'm bored with it. Can you take a shot at fleshing this out? That's it. I gave it a couple paragraphs, up front, and then some bullet points for an outline below. It fleshed it out. I edited it, posted it on the web, and told my team, look what I produced. Please give me your feedback. We tweaked it some more, and now it's posted. Those are the kinds of things these are great for. And if you're not using them, I think you have a lot of benefit awaiting you. And then I did have this. Just always think of this chatbot as a new, completely uninformed teammate who's joining whatever enterprise you're starting on. Give them clear, explicit, and I think best conversational instructions. Over-explain the context. Don't. If I was sitting with Sarah at work, I would feel like I was being, weird if I was telling you, so what I want you to do is go through this line by line and very carefully analyze each student's bit of, no, do that with these. It's a robot. It's not going to be offended. The more clear your context and instructions are, the better. A lot of people find it helpful to ask them to assume a particular persona. Explain this like you're teaching a class. You are a student satisfaction officer at an academic medical school, and you care about the students' experience in their classes and are tasked with reviewing their feedback to make sure that all things are going well in their education. Here's the data set. Bob.
You don't have to get all of this in the first line you put because it will converse with you. So you could say, well, that wasn't exactly correct.
Yep.
Can you do such and such? And it remembers the last few things, which I thought was pretty interesting. Mm-hmm. Because it remembers the conversation conversation you're having with it. So you could say, you're a woman. Okay, now I want you to do this. Now I want to do this. And it doesn't have to be all at once.
Yep, absolutely. But I guess what I'm advocating for is be detailed, right? In a way that would feel really awkward with another human being. This is not a human being. And there's a practice called multi-shot or multiple shot prompting, which is I want you to process this data set. I want you to look for feedback. Here are 3 example files of previous reports that have been done on previous year's data sets that represent the output that we would like. Prompt the model with something that looks like what you're looking for to give it something to get started. That includes formatting instructions. Break it up into these sections and those kinds of things. So that idea of kind of figuring out how to prompt the system to get what you want out, you'll hear some people call it prompt engineering. I jokingly put up on my LinkedIn page a couple years ago that I'm a prompt engineer. My boss didn't think that was that funny, but I did. And then the last thing is, if you have complicated tasks, generally break them up into steps. Like I tend to do these things very early, right? Like I'll give an AI one big prompt to set the scenario, but then I'll say, I would like you to highlight the top 10 bits of positive feedback out of this student data set. Now, can you please let me know any particularly negative bits of feedback that you found in this data set? Now summarize it. Instead of saying one big task with a lot of steps, it gets lost in the weeds on that. Separate iterative steps seem to work better. And then I just say, consider the difference. If I asked you, you were coming into a work environment, I gave you these 2 different prompts. Summarize customer feedback in the spreadsheet and identify any trends versus you oversee customer service for a restaurant chain, review the feedback, provide summaries for our regional leaders. Now you've got an idea of the kind of information you might want to be looking for. Some customer frustration with wait times or service delays are normal, but we must call out cases where staff had negative personal interactions with customers. We can't prevent delays, but we must ensure that our staff are courteous. Here's last year's report to get you started. Just you as a person, which one of those tasks would you rather be handed your first day on the new job? Right? Second one gives you a lot more context. That's vital to get good output with these tools. And that's it. Go forth. Herald the coming AI overlords. Last chance for questions. And we are at 7:30, so I just want to let people know what time it is. I'm happy to stay and talk more if that'd be helpful. And again, I'm happy to do more of this if this is all helpful.